The Netherlands flower industry is huge. This is the center of the global market. Between 60 and 70% of all cut flowers sold on the planet are sold through the Netherlands. Between 4 and 5 in the morning, trading starts at 6 in the morning. It's a lot like buying a pair of jeans. Yeah. You can know that Levi's is your brand, you can know your waist size and length, but you gotta try it on.
Our guest today is an expert. He's an American, a former Fulbright scholar who came to Amsterdam to do a PhD at the University of Amsterdam on the scope and impact of the Dutch flower industry. And he wrote this book, Holland Flowering: How the Dutch Flower Industry Conquered the World. Welcome, Andrew Gebhardt. Thank you for coming. It's interesting, the tulip, for example, has become the emblematic symbol of the Netherlands. There's a picture of then Princess Maxima, now Queen Maxima, in Lower Manhattan a few years ago to celebrate the 400th anniversary of the founding
Henry Hudson, yeah.
Henry Hudson. And she's pouring champagne in Lower Manhattan on a new variety of tulip. Yeah. That they're naming the Henry Hudson or something like that. Yeah. And everybody clapped and said, yes, this is the Netherlands. We view tulips as the emblem of the Netherlands. But tulips are not even indigenous to this country. Right. They were brought here from someplace else. How did that come to be?
Yeah, it's those whole, what you're mentioning is part of, they call them tulip naming ceremonies. And it's part of what's actually kind of an invented tradition. So the way it's often sold is precisely in this kind of context. It's an anniversary of Henry Hudson, and it's suggestive of this rich Dutch history that goes back for centuries and this sort of classical Dutch form. But it's actually a recent invention, and they're often given the sort of premature or endorsement of Dutch royalty and other sort of classic Dutch brands, KLM. And then they're tulips that are named then after, they're named after first ladies and prime ministers and these sorts of phenomenon. Things. Yeah.
What's also interesting to me is the historic context of the flower industry. Yeah. Because if you look at the dates, just to go back for 400 years, more than 400 years, in 1581, the 80 Years' War ended. And the modern Dutch republics began their formation.
Yes.
And the Netherlands entered a time of great growth.
Yes.
What did they do? They started importing tulips and flowers.
Yes.
And establishing botanical gardens.
Yeah.
Why? I'm fascinated by this. You can't eat flowers.
Right.
They're decorative.
Yes.
The society wasn't still even then so rich that people were decorating extensively. Why did that happen in that early time?
Yeah, it's a really interesting time, and I think it's a touchstone for the books. I make a lot of comparisons between these early days of the Dutch Republic and today, and one of those interesting comparisons happened just at this time. So there's this incredible overlap of scientific discoveries going on. In the Netherlands, people had always had gardens for growing herbs and so on.
Rich people were decorating their gardens with flowers.
It started as people it's a nouveau riche society at the beginning of the 17th century. So yeah, so pleasure gardens became another thing, and with these pleasure gardens, tulips became a major feature. And then there's, of course, the VOC, the VOC is the
Dutch East India Company that was sending ships all over the world to do trade.
Exactly.
Plus and they had them bring back plants to him.
Yes. And so there's actually a term for it. It's colonial botany. So if we all learned in school that
colonial botany.
Yeah, but we all learned that it's all about spices. That's why Columbus started to sail, right? So.
But these were not comestibles. You couldn't.
But these are not comestibles.
This was
and
for medical reasons?
unlike nutmeg and some of the other kinds of spices that the Dutch that really were connected to slavery and a lot of brutality. The flower bulbs were quickly indigenized. They were quickly started to be cultivated in the Low Countries.
1600, 1610, 1620, 1630. The
Exactly.
population of Amsterdam multiplied by 500%,
Yes.
I read.
Yes.
Between 1580 and about 1650.
Yes.
From a little place of 30,000 people to a city of 150,000
Yeah.
people, a substantial city
Yes.
in this short time.
And along with these changes, there's a lot of commercial innovation,
Yeah.
and then there's also the development of land. So this is when the famous poldering starts in the Netherlands.
Yeah. There's this great expression that God made the earth, but the Dutch made Holland.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
it's true.
Yeah. The comparison between the way things are done in the Netherlands and the way the flower industry might work in the United States, it is a really interesting comparison. Here in the Netherlands, there is a lot more cooperation. So often growers will speak to each other and give each other tips on effective ways of growing.
They're not really competing. They're members of a cooperative.
They're members of a
and
cooperative.
The success of the cooperative
Yeah.
benefits all of them.
Yeah.
You
Yes.
talk about whether the flower industry is masculine or feminine.
Yes.
Given that most of the people who work in the industry are men,
Yes.
but they are proud of the beauty that they're creating.
Yes.
So it's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Is this industry a particularly masculine or feminine industry?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think of a couple of stories I can tell related to that, but one is just is a historical thing that I think is just a curiosity about sex and gender and flowers. We all hear about the stories of the birds and the bees and pollination and so on. But in this formative period in the Netherlands in the Golden Age, botany is an emerging science at that point.
Yes.
Paintings of flowers became very important, not only still life painting, but they were actually sold as catalogs, as sorts of sales catalogs for how the scientific documentation of the sexes of flowers.
Yes.
And there was an understanding that this was erotic, and there was a sense that there was an eroticism to it, that they were viewed almost as pornography at these designs of flowers. Yes.
The picture that you have on the front of your book is very evocative. It's
Yes.
a beautiful painting. It's a 16th or 17th century
Yes.
painting of flowers.
Viewers are probably getting sexually stimulated looking at it.
I wonder about that. It's a terrific book, Holland Flowering: How the Dutch Flower Industry Conquered the World. Really a great book. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to
Thanks.
us. And thank you all for watching us today on Amsterdam Writers Platform.